The raw, dank air of the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, clung to the coarse wool of my cloak, seeping beneath my leather doublet and quilted gambeson, the attire of an order novice. Each breath I took was a heavy draught of mingled scents. The thick aroma of decaying pine needles and damp black earth mixed with the faint yet insidious odor of something else. Ancient, mossy, musty. Like the pages of the most decrepit tomes in our Brotherhood scriptorium. We had been walking for many hours since dawn, and the sun, which had already sparingly filtered its rare rays through the impenetrable canopy of ancient firs and pines, was beginning its descent westward. Low clouds snagged on the treetops, stained troubling shades of crimson and violet, as if the very heavens foreboded evil. The trail, if that tangled mess of slick roots, sharp stones, and viscous mud could even be called such, snaked between mighty trunks overgrown with dark green, velvety moss. Roots like the gnarled fingers of a leprous giant gripped the stony soil with a deathly hold, forcing me to constantly watch my footing to avoid a broken ankle. My name was Lucas, and this was my first true mission outside the Abbey walls. My trial by fire, as the elder brothers of the Order called it with grim amusement. Before this lay long years in the hidden monastery, lost somewhere in the inaccessible alpine valleys. Endless study of dusty parchments and bestiaries depicting creatures whose existence common folk had long relegated to old wives' tales and drunkards' ravings. Drilling combat techniques with sword, axe, and crossbow in the training yard. Learning the basics of herb lore and alchemy to prepare balms and poisons. And of course the special insights. Under the mentor's supervision, we ingested infusions of rare fungi and herbs, plunging into illusory visions where we battled spawn of darkness conjured by our own fear and the brew's power. But visions, as I was beginning to bitterly understand, didn't smell of real rot and primal terror. They didn't make the heart hammer against the ribs like a snared bird with every suspicious crack of a dry twig or rustle in the dense undergrowth. Ahead, broad-shouldered and indomitable as a cliff face, strode Brother Gregor, an old warrior of the Order, his face crisscrossed with scars, mementos of dozens of battles with foul creatures, seemed hewn from the same gray stone as these ancient mountains. The heavy two-handed sword on his back looked like an extension of himself. Every step he took was measured, every movement economical and precise. He didn't look back, he had no need. I felt almost physically sensed that he was aware of my every uncertain step on the slippery stones, my every ragged breath. Behind me, moving lightly and silently as a forest cat, walked Sister Anya. She was younger than Gregor, but her eyes, the color of steel beneath a stormy sky, held the same unwavering confidence of an experienced hunter. Anya was our tracker and expert on forest creatures, both mundane and special. A light crossbow and a long dagger hung at her belt. It was she who had stopped us several times, pointing out to me barely noticeable impressions in the moss. A twig broken in a peculiar way, or a faint claw print in the damp earth, explaining in a quiet but clear voice what beast had passed, how long ago, and even what its intentions might have been. Sometimes she caught my tense gaze and offered an encouraging half-smile, seeing my obvious novice's anxiety. But deep in her eyes still lurked a shadow of impenetrable seriousness that made it clear. This was no pilgrimage. The Order of St. Judas Iscariot, the name echoed in my mind again. A strange, almost heretical name for a brotherhood dedicated to secretly defending Christendom from the spawn of darkness. Legend, whispered within the abbey walls, held that the Order's founder, a mysterious knight from the Dark Ages, chose the name deliberately. He believed that Judas, the first of the apostles to confront true darkness after his betrayal, had, in terror and repentance, dedicated the rest of his days to secretly combating it, seeking redemption not before God, but before mankind. Thus Judas, the betrayer, became the unspoken patron of those fighting a hopeless war against an evil most never suspect. For centuries, the Order operated deep in the shadows, guarding its existence as its greatest secret. Our unspoken code rested on 3 pillars: silence, secret revelare noli; non-interference, sine necessitate ne intercedas; concealment, vestigia nulla relenque. We painstakingly gathered ancient knowledge, copied crumbling manuscripts, developed weapons and tactics, and inducted into our ranks the few who were willing to believe the unbelievable and dedicate their lives to this endless secret war. Our archives in the Alpine Citadel held scribes' reports on burning ghoul nests in the wild Carpathians, exorcising evil spirits from old Frankish castles, containing water serpents in misty Scottish lochs. And, of course, about werewolves, shapeshifters, especially those who had made their home in the dense, primeval forests of the German lands like this Schwarzwald. The scrolls detailed their transformation cycles under the moon, their bestial strength, their weaknesses: high purity silver, rare and costly, aconite, wolfsbane, a poisonous plant, sometimes holy water or fire, but each chapter invariably ended with a note from the senior chronicler. These details may vary from place to place and creature to creature. Every encounter is a new trial. Especially fear the pack leaders, ancient, mighty werewolves whose power and cunning are difficult to measure. "Keep up, Lucas." Gregor's low, rumbling voice pulled me from my thoughts. He spoke without turning. "Night falls fast and without warning in the Black Forest, and we still need to reach the village before the light fades completely." I nodded hastily, though he couldn't see it. The air grew colder still, chilling me to the bone beneath my damp clothes. The shadows under the trees lengthened, merging into a solid, impenetrable mass where my imagination painted lurking monsters. The forest around us wasn't just a collection of trees and bushes. It breathed. It watched. This irrational, primal feeling, as if hundreds of unseen eyes were tracking you from the darkening thicket, grew stronger with every step deeper into its sinister domain. I instinctively touched the hilt of the steel dagger at my belt, the personal weapon of every brother, consecrated and bearing protective symbols carved into the handle. The cold metal slightly calmed the faint tremor in my fingers, but couldn't dispel the sticky, nauseating fear coiling like a knot just below my breastbone. I kept replaying my insights under the mushroom infusions, illusory monsters, the controlled environment of a cell or courtyard, a mentor nearby, ready to break the vision. Here, there were no infusions and no mentors ready to intervene. There was only the trail disappearing into the gloom, 2 experienced warriors whose lives were also on the line, and me, a novice whose knowledge from the scrolls now seemed like nothing more than dry words on parchment. "Do you hear that?" Anya whispered suddenly, freezing so abruptly I nearly stumbled into her. We froze too, straining our ears. The silence of the forest crashed down on us, oppressive, ringing in its fullness, and through that deafening quiet, I discerned a howl. But it wasn't the ordinary wolf howl I'd heard before in the woods. This sound was lower, more drawn out. It vibrated in the very air, and held such primal, untamed anguish and seething rage that the hairs on my neck stood on end, and icy sweat trickled down my spine. It rolled out in a long, eerie echo between the ancient trunks, silencing even the unseen night birds and crickets. Gregor slowly turned his head, his steel-gray eyes meeting Anya's. Not a single word was spoken, but I saw in their instantaneous silent exchange a complete understanding of the situation. This wasn't just checking on rumors of an unusually large wolf, as our contact's report from the nearest town had stated. This was something else entirely. The howl came again, distinctly closer this time, seeming to originate from the neighboring hill, overgrown with impenetrable thicket. "Werewolf," Anya stated almost soundlessly, moving only her lips, her hand already resting on the stock of her crossbow. And a powerful one. Judging by the voice, an old male, perhaps the alpha. Gregor gave a curt nod, his face becoming even more stern and unreadable. "Move faster. The village should be over that ridge. We'll take shelter there and decide what to do." We quickened our pace, almost breaking into an uneven run on the treacherous, slippery path. Dusk gathered with frightening speed, transforming the forest into a labyrinth of black silhouettes and dancing shadows, where any bush could conceal deadly danger. My trial by fire was beginning right now, here, on this god-forsaken trail, to the accompaniment of a howl that chilled the blood. And I desperately, almost prayerfully, hoped that at least some of the knowledge from the Order's ancient scrolls would prove true and help me survive this night. We emerged from the forest so suddenly, it felt like passing through an invisible, shimmering veil of wet branches and fog. Before us lay a small valley, squeezed between wooded hills, already almost entirely swallowed by the evening mist that swirled over the ground in ragged white wisps like a shroud. In the center of the valley, huddled like frightened sheep before a wolf, lay the village. Half-timbered houses with dark, massive beams and once whitewashed walls, now grayed by time, rain, and soot, might have looked peaceful in daylight. But now, in the thickening twilight and under a pall of oppressive silence, they seemed like grim, abandoned crypts. The windows were tightly shut with heavy wooden shutters. No smoke curled from the crude stone chimneys, although the biting evening cold made us huddle in our cloaks and clearly called for stoked hearths. The uneven cobblestone streets were utterly deserted. The silence here wasn't the forest's quiet, full of hidden life and whispers, but a dead, crushing silence, as if life itself had fled this cursed place. The only sound breaking it was the mournful, monotonous creak of a rusted iron sign depicting a beer stein above the dark void of a doorway, what had once apparently been the village's only tavern. We had barely set foot on the first street when an old woman cautiously peered out from behind the tightly closed door of one of the nearest houses. Her face, wrinkled like a baked apple, was pale with terror, her faded eyes wide. Seeing us, three strangers in the dark cloaks of the Order, armed, unfamiliar faces, she gasped in fright and immediately slammed the door shut. We heard the characteristic dull thud. On the other side, a heavy wooden bar had been hastily thrown. A similar reaction occurred at a couple of other houses. A frightened face glimpsed in a crack between shutters, followed instantly by the creak and thud of a locking bar. Fear here wasn't just a feeling. It was almost palpable, permeating the chilly air, the house walls, the gazes of the unseen inhabitants watching us from the darkness of their homes. Finally, as we reached the central square with its dry stone well, a short but stocky man of about 50 with thick gray mustaches and a worried, hunted look emerged from the sturdiest-looking house, the one with a carved wooden porch, likely belonging to the village elder. He was Herr Miller, the elder, as he introduced himself, nervously twisting his worn woolen cap in his hands. He gave us a long, appraising look, full of mistrust and a hidden final sliver of hope, his eyes darting anxiously over our faces, lingering on the hilts of Gregor's sword and Anya's crossbow. Are you the ones they promised to send from the town?" he asked in a low, cracked voice, as if afraid the shadows thickening at the forest's edge might overhear him. "We've come to help you in your trouble, good man," Gregor replied in an even, calm tone, offering no details about the Brotherhood. Such was our protocol for initial contact with civilians. "Word reached us of the afflictions in these parts." Miller nodded silently and gestured for us to enter his house. The interior was modest, but clean. The air hung thick with the smells of sauerkraut, hearth smoke, and dried herbs hanging in bunches near the door, a futile attempt to ward off evil. The elder seated us at a large, roughly hewn oak table and sat opposite, clasping his calloused, work-worn hands on the tabletop. His fingers trembled noticeably. "It all started about 3 weeks ago, good sirs," he began his sorrowful tale, lowering his voice almost to a whisper, as if fearing even the walls had ears. "First, the livestock vanished. Sheep, 5 in one night. Found them in the morning in the far pasture, torn to shreds. No, it wasn't a wolf or a lynx. A wolf doesn't kill like that. It takes one, strangles it, carries it off. But this was a slaughter. Senseless and terrible, as if the devil himself had amused himself." He shuddered violently, crossing himself. "At first, we thought maybe a bear, though bears are a great rarity in these parts. But then old Hans Kruger, our woodcutter, disappeared. Lived alone right at the edge of the woods. Went into the forest for kindling towards evening and never came back. The whole village searched for him for 2 days. We found, well, what was left of him." Müller fell silent, his face twisting with heavy memories and horror. "Lord have mercy on his soul. You wouldn't wish seeing that on your worst enemy. Scraps. Bones gnawed clean as if boiled in acid, and the tracks around. Huge, terrible, not human and not animal." "Has anyone else gone missing since then?" Anya asked gently but firmly, unfolding a piece of parchment with a crudely drawn map of the area on the table. "Yes," Miller nodded bitterly. "A week ago, 2 boys, the blacksmith's and the miller's sons, Carl and Fritz, about 14 they were, decided, fools, to prove their courage to the girls, made a bet they'd go right to the forest edge at night. They were never found. Not a trace, not a scrap of clothing, not a bone. Only this." He pulled a small, dirty scrap of blue fabric from his tunic. "Is all that was left of Carl. Found it on a thorn bush deep in the thicket near the Black Ravine." "Have you or any of the villagers seen this creature?" I asked, trying to keep my voice from trembling at the nausea rising at the thought of those boys' fate. Miller slowly shook his head. "No one's seen it clearly. Too fast, like a shadow. Just a glimpse of something huge in the darkness at the edge of your vision. And the growl. The kind that freezes your blood and sends your soul fleeing. It only comes at night. Every night. We lock ourselves in as soon as the sun sets behind the hills, pray to St. Michael. But every night it comes closer. We hear it. Walking around the village, sniffing the air, sometimes scraping its claws on the shutters or doors, it's toying with us. It's waiting." While Gregor methodically questioned Müller about details, exact times, and places of attacks, what the tracks looked like, any strange omens before the attacks, Anya was already marking everything on her map, correlating the elder's account with the forest trails and dangerous spots she knew. I, meanwhile, frantically tried to connect what I heard with what I'd read in the Order's scrolls. Incredible brutality exceeding any beast's instincts, immense physical strength, giant tracks with claw marks, strictly nocturnal activity. All signs pointed to a werewolf, but Miller's stories painted a picture of something even wilder, more malevolent and more ancient than the common werewolves described in our bestiaries. This creature killed not just for hunger, but for the terror it sowed, as if reveling in it. We must inspect the last attack site immediately, while there's still some light and before rain washes away the tracks, Anya said, decisively folding the map. Muller offered to guide us, though his pale face and darting eyes showed he was terrified to leave his house and step out into the gathering dusk. We went to the edge of the village to a dilapidated barn where the last victim, a mauled cow, had been found. The sight was gruesome even for me, who had seen plenty of horrors in the illusory insights. Huge chunks of flesh had been ripped out with inhuman force, ribs snapped like dry twigs, entrails scattered in the mud. The ground around was heavily trampled with tracks that made even the stoic Gregor curse softly under his breath. The tracks were enormous, far larger than any known wolf or bear prints, with clear impressions of 5 long, thick claws dug deep into the earth. "This is no ordinary werewolf," Anya murmured, crouching down and carefully examining one of the clearest tracks, measuring it with her fingers. The size, the power. It far surpasses the common lycanthropes described in our chronicles. Looks like an alpha, possibly even a Vargulf, as they're called in old Saxon legends. An ancient, primordial beast. She carefully used tweezers from her field kit to pick up a tuft of coarse, dark gray, almost black fur snagged on a splinter from the broken fence, placed it in a small leather pouch, and tucked it into her bag. Primordials. I repeated in a whisper, feeling goosebumps prickle my spine again. Back at the Abbey, they spoke of them as almost mythical monsters, progenitors of modern werewolves, nearly invulnerable to common weapons, possessing malevolent intelligence even in beast form, and capable of commanding others. Are their weaknesses the same? Silver? Wolfsbane? Silver should wound them. It's their curse, Anya replied, uncertainly rising. But the tales and rare records from the archives say they are far smarter, cunning, and immeasurably stronger than common beasts. Their flesh heals quickly. They're hard to kill outright. They might control their transformation better, or even retain parts of their human mind and memory in beast form, making them even more dangerous. Gregor, meanwhile, was examining the damaged wall of the shed next to the barn. Deep, ragged gouges from claws ran across the thick oak planks as if they were rotten wood. "It doesn't just kill for hunger," Gregor said in his low voice, tracing one of the deep gouges with a gloved finger. "It's marking its territory, showing its strength. It revels in the fear it instills in these people." Twilight deepened definitively, turning the valley into a dark bowl filled with swirling mist and a sticky premonition of horror. Returning to the deserted village, we chose an abandoned forester's cabin on the very edge, closest to the woods. The Förster house, as Miller called it, for the night. The villagers watched us go with eyes full of a mixture of desperate hope and mortal fear, hastily barring their doors and shuttering their windows. We were left alone to face the encroaching night and the nightmare lurking within it. The sense of doom that literally hung over this village now felt almost tangible, pressing down on our shoulders. And the same howl we'd heard on the trail now seemed terribly close, just beyond the wall of the darkening, watching forest. The old forester's cabin greeted us with the stale smell of dust, mouse droppings, and cold, long-dead ashes in the crude stone hearth. Through the grimy, web-covered windows, The last gray light of the dying day barely penetrated. We quickly but carefully inspected the house. 2 small rooms with bare log walls and a couple of broken benches downstairs. A creaking wooden ladder leading to an attic under the roof. Not the most secure shelter. The walls were rather thin, but definitely better than staying out in the open at the mercy of the night forest. While Gregor checked and further reinforced the flimsy door and the shutters on the ground floor using rusty nails and a couple of sturdy boards found in the attached woodshed, Anya and I laid out our gear on the only surviving, roughly made table in the main room. The sight of the familiar, deadly tools of our trade was somewhat calming, restoring a sense of order. There they were, the faithful companions of an order warrior. Heavy crossbows, Gregor's powerful one requiring a winch to span, and Anya's lighter, self-cocking model. My own training version was simpler but still dangerous in skilled hands. Quivers were full of short, thick bolts tipped with pure, consecrated silver. A precious commodity the Order procured and processed with great difficulty. Steel swords and daggers, their blades sprinkled with holy water and engraved with protective runes. Several large iron wolf traps, their teeth meticulously rubbed with silver dust by Anya. A few shuttered lanterns with oiled wicks, casting a dim, flickering light. There were no means to contact the Abbey from here, only trust in God and our own strength. A field pouch with medical supplies, clean linen bandages, dried herbs, plantain for wounds, valerian for calming nerves, and of course bunches of aconite wolfsbane, deadly poison to werewolves but dangerous to humans too. Strong spirits for cleaning wounds and warming the soul, a salve made from silver and fat for treating bites from foul creatures, and a small vial of thick, dark tincture, a last resort against turning if bitten by a werewolf, though its efficacy was unproven and depended on many factors. And naturally, the personal talismans every brother and sister of the Order was required to wear at all times. Mine was simple, a small silver cross bearing the symbol of a key and a crown of thorns hanging on a leather cord around my neck. It felt cold against my skin. I checked the string of my crossbow, drawing it taut. My hands trembled slightly, and no matter how I tried to hide it, Anya, sitting opposite and intently wiping a silver bolt tip with a cloth, noticed. "Nervous, Lucas?" she asked calmly, without looking up. Her voice was even, but held a note of understanding. "A little," I admitted, trying to make my voice sound firm. In the visions under the potions, everything was different, not so real. Visions don't smell of blood or stare at you with hungry yellow eyes from the darkness. She nodded, carefully placing the bolt in her quiver. Fear is natural, Lucas. It keeps you alert, sharpens your senses. The important thing is not to let it paralyze you in a fight. Remember what the mentors taught. Observe, think, act, breathe deeply. Gregor finished reinforcing the door and came to the table, picking up Anya's map. He studied her markings intently. "Here's the plan," he began in his usual brisk, no-nonsense tone. He jabbed a thick finger at a point on the parchment. "From the looks of it, the creature comes from the direction of the Black Ravine. That's where the freshest tracks are. Anya, you'll set a couple of our best traps on the main path leading from the ravine, and some simple tripwire alarms with bells on the side trails. Lucas and I will prepare an ambush right here." He pointed to a small clearing about half a verst away, halfway between the village and the ravine. "It's open ground there, trees on the edges. It'll have less chance to approach unseen or escape after the first shot." "Bait?" Anya asked curtly, checking her crossbow mechanism. "The villagers have locked up all their livestock in stone barns in the center of the village." Gregor shook his head. "We won't risk them. We'll have to use what we brought. Some offal and blood the elder's wife gave us, mixed with valerian tincture. The scent attracts predators. He pulled a small clay pot, tightly sealed, from his pack, which emitted a sharp, unpleasant odor. Lucas, your job is crossbow cover and watching our rear and flanks, Gregor continued, turning to me and fixing me with his pale, cold eyes. Stay strictly behind me, about 20 paces. Watch for any movement in the woods. No freelancing. You shoot only on my command or if the creature charges you or me. Understood? Yes, Brother Gregor, I replied, feeling both a slight disappointment at the role of mere observer and immense relief that I wouldn't be the first in the monster's path. Anya nodded to Gregor, picked up the heavy iron traps, coils of rope, and small brass bells, and slipped silently out the door like a shadow, instantly dissolving into the deepening near-black twilight. Gregor and I checked our weapons and supplies one last time. I tightened the straps of my leather cuirass, poor protection, but better than nothing. The cabin sank into an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional creak of old logs and the wind howling in the chimney, which now sounded like sinister whispers from the abyss. The forest outside the windows became a solid black wall. It seemed to have crept right up to the house itself, peering into the dark panes with thousands of invisible eyes. The feeling of confinement I'd experienced on the trail returned with a new, suffocating intensity. It felt as if the cabin's frail walls were slowly closing in around us, and the darkness outside pressed against the shutters, trying to seep inside. I kept replaying images from the scrolls and my terrifying visions. There, everything followed some rules. Here, chaos and the unknown reigned. The image of the mangled cow and Miller's dry, dispassionate account of poor Hans, the woodcutter's fate, surfaced involuntarily, bringing waves of nausea. "Time to go," Gregor said curtly, rising. He slung his heavy crossbow over his shoulder and gripped his sword hilt more firmly. "Try not to fall behind, and step quieter." We stepped out of the cabin into the cold, windy, moonless night. Dense clouds completely obscured the stars. The forest met us with the roar of wind in the tops of the giant firs, and an absolute unnatural silence at ground level. Even the nocturnal creatures were silent, as if hiding in anticipation. We moved towards the designated ambush spot, our shuttered lanterns carving only a small, trembling circle of light out of the all-consuming darkness before us, making the surrounding gloom seem even thicker, deeper, and more hostile. Every step I took on the slick stones and crackling twigs echoed loudly in my ears. I felt like a blind kitten put on display for an unseen, patient hunter. A hunter who knew this forest like the back of his hand, or rather like his 5 deadly claws. The tension mounted with every step, tightening into a cold, hard knot in my stomach. The hunt had begun, and we were more likely the prey than the hunters. We picked our way through the nocturnal, breathing ancient menace of the Schwarzwald for perhaps an hour, maybe less. Time flowed differently in such darkness and tension. Gregor moved ahead confidently and almost silently for his size and weight, his lantern beam methodically probing the path and nearby thickets. I followed close behind, trying my best to tread just as quietly, but the cursed dry twigs and fallen needles under my boots constantly crunched betrayingly, announcing our presence to the entire forest. My own lantern beam darted nervously from side to side, its weak light trying in vain to pierce the gloom between the trees, but the darkness here was thick, viscous like tar, greedily swallowing the light just a few paces away. Suddenly the wind died down, and the forest plunged into an ominous, oppressive silence, broken only by our ragged breathing and the deafening thud of my own heart in my ears. My nerves were stretched taut as a crossbow string. Every random rustle in the bushes, every distant hoot of an owl made me jump and clutch my dagger hilt convulsively. We had almost reached the clearing Gregor had chosen for the ambush. He suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt, and smoothly, without a sound, crouched behind the thick, storm-felled trunk of a giant fir, covering his lantern slide, leaving only a narrow slit of light. I quickly did the same, trying to quell the treacherous trembling in my knees and listening intently to every sound of the night forest. Gregor cupped a hand to his ear, listening, then slowly turned his head, peering into the darkness. I just stared intensely ahead, trying to discern any movement, but saw only vague, shifting silhouettes of trees and bushes that my inflamed imagination twisted into grotesque, menacing shapes of sprites and goblins. Suddenly, Gregor froze, then slowly, very slowly, leaned towards me. "There," he whispered so quietly I could barely hear, nodding slightly to the left, towards dense, tall ferns at the edge of the clearing, about 100 paces away. Movement. Large. I strained my eyes with all my might, but still saw nothing in the impenetrable darkness. The silence around us became even more oppressive, almost physically tangible, and then I heard it. A low, guttural, bubbling growl filled with such undisguised bestial malice that my breath instantly hitched and cold sweat broke out on my back. It came from somewhere within those very ferns. The sound wasn't loud, more visceral, but it chilled me to the bone, paralyzing me with dread. Gregor slowly, without a single wasted motion, raised his heavy crossbow, checking that the bolt was seated properly. "Get ready, Lucas. It knows we're here. Maybe it smells the bait or us." My heart hammered wildly, echoing in my temples. I gripped the stock of my crossbow so tightly my knuckles turned white. The growl repeated, louder this time, morphing into a vicious snarl, accompanied by the distinct crackle of breaking branches. Something big, very big, was crashing through the undergrowth, moving towards us. And then it stepped into the clearing. The creatures from the bestiaries, the drawings on parchment, the illusions from my visions, they were all just pale shadows, children's nightmares compared to this embodiment of primal horror. It was huge, taller than Gregor when it momentarily rose on its hind legs, but now moved on all fours, low to the ground, like a gigantic, monstrously distorted wolf from the most terrifying legends. Coarse, matted, greasy fur, dark gray, almost black, covered an incredibly powerful, muscle-corded body. Disproportionately long and strong forelegs ended in horrific sickle-shaped claws as thick as my finger, which left deep gouges in the damp earth with every step. Its head was elongated, wolf-like, but with distorted, almost human features of naked malice, hatred, and a frightening, devilish intelligence in its eyes, which glowed with a dead phosphorescent yellow light. Thick, stringy saliva dripped from its enormous, elongated maw, filled with sharp, dagger-like fangs of varying lengths. The stench that hit my nostrils even at this distance, a nauseating mix of wet dog, stale blood, carrion, and something else, acridly sulfuric, was almost unbearable, triggering a gag reflex. The werewolf stopped in the center of the clearing, slowly turning its massive head from side to side, noisily drawing air through its nostrils, sniffing. It clearly sensed us, knew where we were hiding, but didn't rush to attack. It studied us, assessed the threat. Despite its bestial appearance, its movements showed not only incredible strength, but also a frightening, calculating cunning. This was no mere frenzied beast. It was an intelligent and ancient predator. "Shoot!" Gregor roared, and his crossbow clicked deafeningly, sending the heavy silver bolt towards the monster. The werewolf bellowed in pain and fury. The bolt struck its left shoulder, leaving a smoking wound from which wisps of smoke and the smell of burnt flesh and fur rose, but its reaction was lightning fast, exceeding my worst fears. It darted sideways with unbelievable blurring speed, moving off the line of fire before Gregor could even think about reloading his powerful but slow weapon. I raised my own crossbow, trying to catch it in my sights, but the creature moved so fast, making huge leaps between trees at the edge of the clearing, sometimes dropping low, sometimes rearing to full height, that I simply couldn't track it. It was like trying to hit a bat with a stone in the dark. "Anya, Sister Anya, to us, the beast is here!" Gregor yelled with all the power of his lungs, hoping she would hear him over the forest sounds, but there was no answer. Only the echo of his voice bounced between the trees. Just then, the werewolf, executing a feint, burst out from behind a huge moss-covered boulder to our right, where we least expected it. It moved low, almost slinking along the ground like a giant black shadow, and charged straight at Gregor with terrifying speed. Gregor managed to draw his sword but couldn't raise it in time to defend. A second later, the werewolf slammed into him with the force of a charging bull. There was a sickening crunch of breaking bone, Gregor's short, choked cry of pain, and the dull thud of his body hitting the damp earth. His crossbow flew far off to the side. I fired, instinctively. The short bolt with its silver tip hit the creature in the side. The werewolf roared again, but this time the sound was filled not only with pain, but also with blind, consuming rage, now directed solely at me. It left Gregor lying motionless on the ground and spun towards me sharply. Its burning yellow eyes locked onto mine, and I felt icy terror seize my entire body. It took a slow step towards me, then another, coiling low for a decisive leap, its muscles bunching beneath the thick black fur. I froze in horror. It was only a few steps away, immense, lethal. I could see every sharp fang in its snarling maw, feel its foul, hot breath even at this distance. I tried again to draw the string of my crossbow, but my hands refused to obey. My fingers couldn't grip the slick string. Time around me slowed, turning into viscous tar. All I saw were those hate-filled burning eyes and the enormous fanged maw rushing inexorably towards me out of the darkness. My first trial by fire was rapidly turning into a bloodbath, and I was the next lamb for the slaughter by this demonic spawn. I squeezed my eyes shut, waiting for the end. The second that stretched into an eternity reached its limit. The snarling, slavering maw of the werewolf was just a foot from my face. I could feel the heat of its breath, when from the side, out of the forest darkness, came a sharp click, the dry whip-crack sound of Anya's crossbow firing. A short silver bolt struck the monster squarely in the neck, making it howl in pain and surprise and instinctively recoil. It spun furiously towards the sound of the shot, seeking its new attacker, and immediately received another bolt, this time in the right thigh, causing it to stumble and roar even louder and angrier. Anya burst from behind a cluster of thick firs at the edge of the clearing, her dark silhouette clearly defined against the slightly lighter night sky. She moved quickly and confidently, spanning the string of her light crossbow on the move with practiced, automatic dexterity. "Lucas, Brother Gregor, are you alive?" she shouted, her voice tense but firm and decisive, cutting through the night silence. Her timely appearance and cry snapped me out of my stupor like a bucket of ice water. The werewolf, distracted by Anya's sudden attack, hesitated for a moment, giving me precious seconds. Forgetting my own fear, I scrambled towards Gregor. He lay crumpled on the ground, trying to push himself up on his elbows, but immediately collapsed again, his face white as snow and contorted in a mask of unbearable pain. His right leg. Saints preserve us! His leg was twisted at a completely unnatural angle below the knee. The thick wool of his trousers was rapidly soaking with dark red blood, and a sharp shard of white bone protruded gruesomely from the ragged wound through the torn fabric. An open fracture, and judging by how quickly the pool of blood was spreading, major vessels were damaged. "Get him out of here, now!" Anya yelled, firing another aimed shot towards the werewolf, which noticeably limping on its wounded hind leg and roaring deafeningly, was slowly retreating into the saving thicket, but clearly had no intention of going far. It was wounded, angry, and still incredibly dangerous. It would stalk us. I grabbed Gregor's heavy body under the arms. He groaned low through gritted teeth, but then went limp, losing consciousness. "Leave. Me. Lucas. Go. Order?" He gasped out with his last strength before his head lolled onto my shoulder. "Never, brother. We don't leave our own," I snarled, not recognizing my own voice. The heat of battle and fear for my comrade surged through my blood, drowning out my own terror and lending unexpected strength. I dragged him like a sack of grain towards the nearest visible cover, a dense thicket of young firs at the base of a small rocky outcrop, which Anya must have spotted earlier as a possible defensive position. She covered our retreat with fire from her crossbow, sending bolt after bolt towards the part of the forest where the furious roars, howls, and crashing sounds indicated the werewolf was circling nearby, unwilling to attack under aimed fire. We practically tumbled into the saving fir thicket, the prickly branches painfully scratching our faces and hands, snagging on our cloaks. It was darker and tighter here, but this confinement offered some deceptive sense of security, of shelter. I carefully lowered Gregor's unconscious body onto the soft pine needle bed, placing my folded cloak under his head. Anya joined us moments later, her breathing heavy and ragged after the short skirmish and run. "He's close," she whispered, listening intently to the disturbing sounds of the night forest beyond our refuge. Circling, licking his wounds, waiting for an opening. He won't abandon wounded prey. She quickly retrieved a leather belt and several clean linen cloths from her field pouch. Skillfully, without wasting a second, she applied a tourniquet with the belt, tightening it with a stick above the terrible wound on Gregor's leg to stop or at least slow the dangerous bleeding. Gregor remained unconscious, perhaps from pain or blood loss, his breathing harsh, ragged, and shallow. Anya poured a little strong spirit from her flask into his mouth, then took out a small clay pot of dark, thick salve, that very remedy against turning. She carefully smeared the edges of the ragged wound with the salve, whispering a short prayer. "The fracture is very bad," she said quietly, almost inaudibly, examining the wound in the dim light of her shuttered lantern. "The bone is shattered. He's lost a lot of blood. And there's a high risk of infection, and not just the usual kind." She looked at me meaningfully, and I understood she meant the werewolf's curse. A bite or even a deep scratch from such a creature's claws often transmitted the demonic affliction. The chances were high, especially if the wound was inflicted by an alpha. I looked at Gregor's deathly pale, drawn face, at his unnaturally twisted, bloodied leg, and an icy wave of despair and hopelessness washed over me. My mentor, the indestructible brother Gregor, severely wounded, possibly dying or worse, might become one of them, the very creatures we hunted in the name of the Order. No contact with the Abbey. We were trapped in this cursed ancient forest with a wounded but no less dangerous alpha werewolf, which craved our blood and knew we were here, weak and vulnerable. Anya was an experienced and cool-headed warrior, but she couldn't simultaneously care for Gregor, keep him alive, and single-handedly hold off such a powerful monster. The full weight of responsibility, cold and overwhelming, suddenly settled on my shoulders. I was the only able-bodied defender left. And then animal panic-stricken fear gripped me. Not the nervous trepidation of a novice I'd felt earlier on the trail, but soul-chilling, will-paralyzing terror. My hand started shaking again, this time completely uncontrollably. My breathing became rapid, shallow. I was almost gasping. Over and over I saw the werewolf's burning yellow eyes, its enormous fangs, felt its incredible power and fury. The scrolls, the training, the wise instructions, all seemed so distant, useless, and absurd in the face of this primal, brutal, deadly reality. I was just a boy, yesterday's novice who played with a wooden sword in the monastery courtyard, accidentally thrown onto the front lines of a real terrifying war against the forces of hell. The forest around us seemed to come alive and close in. The dark, gnarled trunks of the ancient firs looked like the bars of a giant cage with no escape. Every rustle, every crack of a twig outside our flimsy shelter sounded like the footsteps of approaching death. Somewhere very close, in the darkness, the wounded beast was licking the wounds inflicted by Silver and biding its time. It was patient. It was on its home turf. And we were cornered, wounded, terrified, and cut off from help. Anya met my gaze, her eyes sharp. In the dim lantern light, her face looked pale and tired, but her eyes remained hard and determined. "Lucas, pull yourself together," she said firmly, not angrily, more insistently. "Panic is our worst enemy now. It will kill us faster than that beast. Brother Gregor needs our help. He mustn't die or change. I need to watch him and listen to the forest simultaneously. You must get a grip, now. Remember everything the mentors taught you. How to survive in the woods, how to face the enemy. We need to hold out until dawn, just a few more hours till the first cockcrow." Her sharp but fair words sobered me somewhat, pulling me from the mire of panic. Yes, panic meant death. That was the first thing drilled into us at the Abbey. I took several deep, ragged breaths, trying to calm my racing heart and control the trembling in my hands. Gregor moaned softly in sleep or delirium. Anya constantly checked his pulse and breathing, sponging his forehead with water. And somewhere out there, very close in the surrounding darkness, the wounded werewolf waited. And Dawn, saving Dawn, was still agonizingly far away. The night dragged on endlessly, each minute feeling like an hour of waiting for torture. The penetrating cold seeped into our bones despite the thick woolen cloaks and leather doublets. We sat in our makeshift shelter of dense fir branches, backs pressed against the cold stone of the rocky outcrop for warmth and imagined safety. Anya was torn between constantly tending to Gregor, whose breathing remained heavy and rasping, his forehead burning with encroaching fever, and intently monitoring the dark perimeter around us. The werewolf definitely hadn't left. We didn't see it, but we constantly felt its sinister presence nearby. A dry twig would crack under a heavy paw just yards away. A low, guttural, vibrating growl that chilled the blood would drift over, or long claws would scrape against dry earth or tree bark. It was playing with us, like a cat with a mouse, testing our patience, our endurance, reveling in our fear, which it undoubtedly sensed with its demonic sense of smell. Panic, thank God, had receded, replaced by a dull, exhausting yet mobilizing tension. Anya's words and the sight of the helpless, wounded Gregor, who had always seemed an indestructible rock to me, forced me to get a hold of myself. I couldn't afford to fall apart or lapse into stupor. I began frantically recalling not fencing techniques or crossbow skills, but other lessons. those that had seemed boring and secondary in the quiet monastery library. Survival in the wild forest, setting simple traps, psychological resilience and focus in adversity, using what the forest provided. The words of old Brother Thomas, a former soldier who taught us survival, came back to me. When your sword is broken, your arrow spent, and the enemy is strong and wicked, your greatest weapons become your mind, your will, and what lies at your feet. I started to act. Quietly, trying to make as little noise as possible, I surveyed our cramped shelter and the immediate surroundings in the light of my hand-shielded lantern. The fir thicket was dense but not entirely impassable. The rock outcrop above offered some protection from above. I found several fairly thick, dry but sturdy fir branches and methodically sharpened their ends with my dagger, turning them into crude, short spears. It was a pathetic semblance of real defense, but better than nothing. I carefully reinforced the most vulnerable approaches to our fort, driving them deep into the ground at an outward angle. Then I froze for a few minutes and forced myself to listen. Not just waiting for the next growl or crackle of a branch, but truly listening to the night song of the forest, trying to separate the normal background sounds. The distant rustle of leaves in the wind, the creak of old trees, the rare cry of a night bird, the quiet gurgle of water nearby, from sounds that might indicate the werewolf's movement or position. I noticed something. It moved mainly across patches of dry needles and leaves, where its steps were audible, but avoided wide strips covered with a thick layer of damp, slippery moss. Its steps would be almost silent there, but perhaps the slick surface hurt its injured paw. I also noticed that it persistently kept its distance from a small but swift stream flowing just 10 paces from our shelter. The Order's ancient scrolls often mention that many creatures of darkness instinctively avoid fast-flowing, living water. Perhaps this superstition applied even to mighty alphas? "Anya," I whispered as quietly as possible when she momentarily looked up from checking Gregor's bandages. "It's avoiding the stream and the moss." She thought for a second, then gave a curt nod, her eyes glinting faintly in the dark. "Well observed, Lucas. Very well. Perhaps we can use that." I remembered our gear. Anya's traps were likely left somewhere on the trail, and the beast, if truly cunning, had either bypassed or destroyed them. But in my pack, I had flint, steel, and tinder. And Anya had the small brass bells for alarms. I carefully retrieved one bell and a coil of thin but very strong gut line. I found 2 young, flexible saplings growing on either side of the most likely approach path for the werewolf from the stream side, and carefully stretched the line between them at about chest height. I tied the bell to the line so that it would ring if the line was tightened or broken. It was a very simple alarm, but it might give us precious moments of warning. Next, I noticed the abundant resin oozing from the trunks of the old firs around our shelter. Fire. One of the few reliable tools against many night creatures, including werewolves, even if not fatal to an alpha, capable of causing pain and driving it back. I had reliable flint, steel, and dry tinder. I quickly gathered some dry needles, small twigs, and bark, prepared several torches from thick branches wrapped with cloth from the repair kit at one end and generously soaked in resin. Lighting them would be quick if I got a spark on the first try. Anya silently watched my actions out of the corner of her eye, not distracted from Gregor, but her gaze held tacit approval. She changed Gregor's dressing again. The wound looked horrific, but the bleeding, thank God, had almost stopped thanks to the tourniquet and herbs. He was still unconscious, but his breathing seemed a little steadier. Time crawled agonizingly slowly. Seconds dripped like water from a wet branch. The tension didn't ease for a moment. The werewolf fell silent for a while, lying low, and this sudden quiet was even more terrifying and anxious than its previous growls and displays of power. Was it waiting? Regaining strength? Or preparing a new, more cunning attack? Suddenly, very close, just a few steps from our fir thicket, a twig snapped distinctly. We both froze simultaneously, all ears. Then another, closer. It was approaching, slowly, cautiously, exactly from the direction of the stream, where I expected it, where my bell trap was set. My heart hammered again like a trapped rabbit. But this time there was no panic. There was fear. Yes, cold and sticky. But it was under control. It sharpened my senses rather than paralyzing them. I tightened my grip on my dagger hilt in my right hand, while my left fumbled for the flint steel and one of the prepared torches. Anya silently raised her crossbow, aiming into the darkness towards the sound. We held our breath, waiting for the outcome. The steps approached. Heavy, uneven due to the injured paw, but steady. It entered the zone of my primitive trap. A short, sharp jingle rang out. The bell on the line had triggered. The werewolf recoiled with a surprised, furious roar, freezing for an instant at the unexpected sound. The line snapped, but it had done its job. We had warning and had disoriented the beast for precious moments. "Shoot!" Anya yelled simultaneously with me, and her crossbow clicked again, sending a silver bolt into the dark silhouette. This time, I didn't hesitate. While the werewolf roared and looked around, trying to locate the source of the sound, I struck flint against steel. A spark landed on the tinder, which began to smolder. I blew it into flame and touched it to the resinous torch. It burst into bright, smoky orange flame, driving back the darkness. Simultaneously, I drew my dagger from its sheath. The werewolf, enraged by the fresh pain from the silver and the hated, frightening fire of the torch, finally lost the last vestiges of its devilish cunning and charged forward, no longer trying to maneuver, relying solely on its monstrous brute force and blind fury. It hurtled straight towards our flimsy shelter, emitting a deafening roar that shook the ground. I thrust the burning torch forward, trying to drive it back. It slowed for a moment but then lunged again, ignoring the fire. With all my strength, I threw the torch at it. It struck its broad chest, sending a few bright sparks onto its snout. The werewolf shrieked piercingly in pain and fear of the fire, recoiling a step, instinctively trying to bat away the flames clinging to its fur. The fur on its chest smoldered momentarily, spreading a nauseating, acrid smell of burnt hair and flesh. This bought me another moment. I remembered the sharpened stakes I'd driven into the ground. The beast, blinded by rage, pain, and fire, charged headlong, heedless of the path. With a horrific crack of breaking wood and a new, deafening roar of pain, it slammed its chest and shoulder into my improvised defense. One of the thick, sharpened stakes drove deep into its right shoulder, where Gregor's bolt had already wounded it. Another, thinner one tore open its side, leaving a long, bleeding gash. But even this didn't stop its primordial fury. The werewolf tore the stake from its shoulder with monstrous strength, along with a chunk of smoking flesh, seemingly ignoring the horrific pain, and made a final, desperate leap. It crashed down on our shelter from above, crushing and breaking the thick fir branches like dry twigs. I barely managed to scramble aside, stumbling and falling onto my back. Anya also recoiled, trying to reload her crossbow. The monster was right in front of us in the tight, confined space of our ruined shelter. It glared around malevolently and with incredible speed swiped with its clawed foreleg, aiming for my head. I instinctively threw up my left arm to protect myself. Its huge claws, sharp as knives, easily tore through the thick leather of my doublet and the shirt beneath, searing my forearm with unbearable pain. I was face to face with the enraged, wounded alpha, armed only with my dagger. The werewolf reared back again for a killing blow. I instinctively dropped onto my back, rolling sideways across the slippery needles. Its claws slashed inches from my face, tearing up moss and earth where my head had just been. It loomed over me, huge, dark, foul-smelling. Its maw opened, ready to clamp down on my throat. In the dim light, I saw its burning yellow eyes, full of primal, consuming hatred, felt its hot, disgusting breath on my face. This was the end. In a final, desperate surge, gathering the remnants of my will and strength, I stabbed upward with the dagger, gripping the hilt with both hands, aiming for its unprotected neck, where Anya's bolt had already left a ragged wound. The steel blade, consecrated and bearing runes, met something hard and resilient, thick muscle or neck cartilage, but it went in, deep. The werewolf howled so loudly and piercingly it made my ears ring, and staggered back, instinctively clutching the wound on its neck with a forepaw. Dark, thick, almost black blood spurted from it like a fountain, drenching its chest and forelegs. Anya, seizing the moment, fired her reloaded crossbow again, almost point blank. The bolt slammed into the monster's belly. The werewolf swayed, its huge body shuddering. It shifted its bloodshot, pain-filled gaze from me to Anya, then back to me, and then lifted its snout towards the sky, where in the east, above the tops of the black firs, the light was subtly beginning to grow. The pre-dawn twilight, the darkest hour before dawn, but it already carried the faint promise of the saving day. Perhaps it was the first barely perceptible light of the burgeoning day, or the unbearable pain from its numerous wounds, especially the consecrated dagger in its neck, or the realization that a quick and easy victory over us had failed, that made it decide to retreat. With a final furious, guttural snarl, full of unspoken threat and the promise to return and avenge itself, the werewolf spun sharply and, limping badly on both injured legs, stumbling and staggering, plunged away into the saving but already thinning darkness of the forest. Its heavy footfalls and the crackle of breaking branches quickly faded into the distance, growing quieter and quieter until they ceased altogether. We were left alone, alive, in the ruined shelter. Anya immediately rushed to me, helping me to my trembling feet. My left forearm burned like fire. Blood flowed down my arm, mixing with dirt and pine needles, dripping onto the ground. Gregor still lay motionless and unconscious by the rock, but his breathing seemed a little steadier. Chaos reigned around us. Broken stakes, scraps of rope, the trampled bell, fragments of fir branches lay everywhere, dark patches of blood. Ours and the monsters stained the ground. The air was heavy and close with the sharp smell of blood, burnt fur, and the werewolf's bestial stench. The sky in the east grew brighter with each passing minute. The first tentative golden-pink rays of the rising sun began to pierce through the dense canopy of the ancient Schwarzwald trees, painting the swirling morning mist in soft pastel tones. Dawn. We had lived until dawn. We had survived. The sunlight, finally breaking through the dense canopy of ancient firs and pines, seemed unreal, almost a divine sign in this ancient forest after the endless night of primal terror and desperate struggle for survival. Its golden rays fell upon the clearing, ruthlessly illuminating the scene of our recent battle. The trampled, ravaged fir thicket, broken and charred branches, the glint of discarded bolt tips on the ground, dark, already drying stains of blood on the moss and earth. Brother Gregor's crimson blood, my own, and the thick, viscous, almost black blood of the werewolf. The air was still heavy. but now the acrid smells of blood and burnt fur mingled with the fresh, resinous, tangy scent of the morning coniferous forest and damp earth. I sat on the ground, leaning heavily against the cold stone of the rock outcrop, while Anya silently but intently treated the deep wound on my forearm with strong spirits and applied a poultice of medicinal herbs. The werewolf's claws had left 4 long, ragged gouges. The herbs and spirits burned the wound mercilessly like a hot iron, but I just clenched my teeth, silently watching her quick, confident movements. "You were lucky, Lucas," she said finally, tightly bandaging the wound with a clean linen cloth. "The bone is intact and no major veins were severed, but the wound needs watching. The claws of these creatures are foul, and their saliva is venomous." She didn't say, "the werewolf's curse," but the unspoken threat hung heavy in the morning air between us. Another thing I would now have to pray and worry about, another gift from the Black Forest. Brother Gregor was alive. That was the main thing. Anya checked his pulse and breathing again. He was still unconscious, but his condition seemed to have stabilized, as much as possible with such injuries. The tourniquet had stopped the heavy bleeding, and the herbs and salve might help fight infection. But he urgently needed a healer's care and rest, which we couldn't provide here in the wild forest. "Is it gone?" I asked in a hoarse, cracked voice, involuntarily glancing towards the direction where the wounded werewolf had disappeared into the dense darkness. The forest there seemed even blacker and more sinister. Anya followed my gaze, her face weary but serious and focused. "Gone, for now. The wounds from the silver, especially the one you gave it with the dagger in the neck, must be serious, even for such a creature. The dawn also weakened it significantly, forced its retreat. But it's alive. I feel it in my gut. These ancient beasts have devilish vitality. It will lie low somewhere in its lair, healing, but it remembered us, and it will definitely be back. Perhaps as soon as next night, seeking vengeance." Her words held no threat. They were simply a cold, dispassionate statement of fact, based on the Order's experience and knowledge. Our work never ended with one battle, one victory. We had only bought this unfortunate village a reprieve unless the Order sent reinforcements for a proper hunt to destroy the beast. But that could take days, even weeks. I looked down at my hands. They still trembled slightly, but no longer from panic, rather from the strain and mortal exhaustion. They were smeared with dirt, my own blood, and the dark, sticky blood of the monster. I vividly recalled the sickening sensation as the consecrated dagger entered the living, resisting flesh of the werewolf, its deafening roar full of pain and fury, its burning yellow eyes inches from my face. The memory brought neither pride nor righteous anger, only a dull, aching pain deep inside and rising nausea. Trial by fire. I had passed it. I had survived where knowledge from scrolls and training in the monastery courtyard proved only a pale shadow of the brutal, bloody reality. I had come face to face with primal, demonic terror and hadn't broken, hadn't fled, hadn't surrendered. But the price of this lesson was high. The naive fervor of a novice and the romantic image of a warrior of light with which I had walked the path into this cursed forest just a day ago had vanished without a trace, replaced by a cold, sober understanding of what service in the Order of St. Judas truly entailed. It wasn't the noble deeds of knightly ballads. It was a dirty, bloody, exhausting and often secret war fought in the shadows, where victory often meant simply surviving until the next dawn, having lost brothers or a piece of one's soul. Anya finished tending to my arm and came over to me. She looked at me silently for several long seconds, as if assessing the changes within me, then silently offered me her water skin. I took several large, greedy gulps, feeling the life-giving moisture soothe my parched throat. "You did well, Lucas," she said finally, quietly but firmly. It was neither praise nor approval, just a statement of fact. "You didn't succumb to fear when you had every right to. You thought, you used what you knew, you fought. Without your trap and your dagger strike, we likely wouldn't have seen the morning." She briefly placed her hand on my shoulder, a short but significant touch that meant more to me now than any words of encouragement from the mentors. Then she immediately switched back to her usual businesslike tone. "We need to get out of here as quickly as possible. We'll fashion a stretcher for Brother Gregor. The journey back to the village will be long and difficult. We need to hurry before he regains consciousness and starts suffering from the pain, or before our fanged friend recovers and decides to return for our souls." We set to work, using sturdy young poles, our spare cloaks, and strong leather straps. The sun climbed higher, bathing the forest in golden light, but the surrounding thicket didn't lose its sinister, oppressive atmosphere. The forest still seemed to watch us with its invisible eyes, ancient, mighty, and utterly indifferent to the small human drama that had played out beneath its canopy. The echo of the werewolf's last furious howl still seemed to linger among the trees, lodging somewhere deep in my soul, like a harbinger of future battles. As we, breathing heavily and frequently swapping places, carried the makeshift stretcher bearing Gregor's unconscious body along the faint trail back towards the fear-frozen village, I knew for certain that I had changed forever. The Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, had taken my youth, my dreams of glory, and left in their place deep scars, both on my body and in my soul. Only now had I become a true brother of the Order, not by vow, but by blood, by shared terror, and by the burden accepted. And I also knew that many more such dark nights and terrifying encounters lay ahead. The ancient forests, abandoned ruins, and dark dungeons of Europe held countless similar spawn of darkness. And someone had to stand guard, protecting the sleeping Christian world from this hidden nightmare. Now I was one of them, but the illusions were gone. Only grim duty, perpetual danger, and the inescapable shadow of primal horror remained, always lurking somewhere nearby, just beyond the thin veil of the visible world.